Do you seriously think someone like you can demand anything here? Sit down, shut up, and be grateful we're even listening to you. Officer Rick Davidson's voice dripped with disdain, his words slicing through the tense air of the police station like shards of glass. The woman stood her ground, her gaze steady despite the humiliation swelling in her chest. She wasn't there to argue, only to report a theft. But the hostility came unprovoked. "Excuse me," she replied, her voice calm yet firm, her dignity fighting against the searing indignity of the moment. But Rick wasn't done. With a smirk radiating malice, he grabbed his steaming cup of coffee, tilted it slightly in his hand, and with a deliberate motion, threw it across the desk. The liquid splashed across her face, the scalding heat burning her skin. Yet, it was the coldness in his actions that struck deeper. Gasps echoed from the few witnesses in the station, some shocked, others complicit in their silence. "Consider it a reminder of where you stand," he spat, his tone saturated with authority and prejudice. She stumbled back slightly, her mind spinning, not just from the pain but from the sheer audacity of what had just happened. Her face stung, her pride bruised, and yet she refused to break. There was too much at stake for her to crumble here. Rick leaned back, smug in his assumed victory, unaware that the woman he had just assaulted was no ordinary civilian. In fact, she was far from it. And soon, he and everyone else in that station would realize just how colossal his mistake had been. For weeks, the department had buzzed with rumors of a new chief of police, someone who was going to shake things up. No one expected that person to be a woman, much less a black woman, and least of all, the very woman now standing in the middle of the station, coffee dripping from her chin. Rick had unwittingly targeted his soon-to-be superior in a display of arrogance that would mark the beginning of his undoing. But what made this confrontation inevitable? Why had she walked into the station that day without revealing her position? What vendetta had led Rick to act with such overt hostility? And, most importantly, what was going to happen next? As the minutes ticked by, the station began to shift. The air grew heavier, tension bubbling beneath the surface as whispers spread about what had just occurred. The woman, still composed despite the humiliation, disappeared into a back office with a silent, knowing expression that sent a chill through the room. It was as if she were planning something, a reckoning none of them were prepared for. Rick's confidence began to waver when an unexpected figure arrived at the precinct. A high-ranking official locked eyes with the woman and immediately offered her the respect she deserved. Questions buzzed around the station. Who was she? Why was someone so powerful treating her with such reverence? Slowly, the truth began to unravel, and with it, Rick's smug facade began to crack. What followed was a series of events that left everyone in shock, from the lowest-ranking clerk to the most seasoned detective. By the time the truth was fully revealed, the tables had turned so dramatically that even those who had initially sided with Rick couldn't help but feel the weight of justice bearing down. This wasn't just a story about one man's bigotry or one woman's resolve. It was about something much larger: the cracks in a system, the courage to confront injustice, and the consequences of underestimating the wrong person. In the heart of Atlanta, where the hum of the city mixed with the rhythmic pulse of determination, Jordan Hayes stood as a testament to resilience. Jordan, a tall, commanding woman in her late 30s, carried herself with the kind of confidence that came from years of pushing through barriers others had placed before her. Her caramel-brown skin glowed under the city lights, and her sharp eyes reflected both warmth and unyielding strength. She wasn't just a woman who had climbed the ranks in law enforcement. She was a survivor of countless battles fought against prejudice, sexism, and systemic resistance. Jordan had grown up in Mechanicsville, a neighborhood where dreams often collided with harsh realities. Raised by her grandmother, Clara, a fiery civil rights activist, Jordan learned from an early age that standing up for herself and others wasn't a choice, it was a necessity. Respect isn't given to us, Jordan. It's taken, fought for, and earned, and even then, some will refuse to see it, Clara often said, determined to change a system that had so often failed her community. Jordan worked her way through the ranks of the police force with an unshakable resolve. By the time she earned the opportunity to lead, she had seen every layer of the system, from the streets where beat cops enforced rules unevenly to the offices where decisions were made behind closed doors. Her vision was clear: reform the system from within, even if it meant enduring the kind of scrutiny and resistance that most would shy away from. Meanwhile, in the precinct Jordan would soon lead, Officer Rick Davidson represented the kind of complacency and entitlement Jordan had spent her career fighting against. In his early 40s, Rick built his career not on merit, but on relationships and unspoken privileges. He was the kind of officer who saw the badge as a shield for his behavior rather than a responsibility. Rick's disdain for anyone who challenged his authority was well known, and his behavior towards civilians of color was particularly troubling. To him, respect for the police was non-negotiable, and anyone who questioned him was an enemy. It didn't matter whether the challenge was polite or confrontational. He saw both as a threat to his fragile ego. On the day Jordan walked into the precinct unannounced, dressed deliberately in plain clothes, she had a clear purpose: to observe without the weight of her title influencing behavior. It was a strategic choice, rooted in years of experience. Jordan knew that how people acted when they thought no one important was watching revealed their true character. Rick was stationed at the front desk, leaning back in his chair with casual arrogance. When Jordan asked for assistance, he barely looked up. "What do you want?" he asked, his tone laced with irritation. "I need to report a theft," she replied, her voice steady. Rick's smirk widened. "Figures," he muttered under his breath, just loud enough for her to hear. Jordan didn't flinch. "Excuse me," she said, meeting his gaze with unwavering calm. "What's the problem? Another purse stolen? Some phone you lost?" he said, rolling his eyes. "You people always think we're here to play babysitter." Jordan's jaw tightened, but she held her ground. "I'd like to file a report," she said firmly. Rick leaned forward, his smirk turning into a sneer. "And I'd like you to learn how to stay in your lane. But we can't always get what we want, can we?" Before Jordan could respond, Rick reached for his coffee mug. His actions were deliberate, calculated, a show of dominance rather than an impulsive act. He threw the steaming liquid toward her, though she turned her head in time to avoid the worst of it. The coffee splashed across her cheek and neck. The heat bit at her skin, but it was the humiliation that burned deeper. "Consider that a lesson in respect," Rick said, leaning back in his chair with satisfaction. Jordan's gaze locked onto his. "Unyielding respect," she said softly, her voice carrying a weight that made the word feel like a warning. As she turned and walked toward the back of the precinct, the tension in the room was palpable. No one knew who she was, but everyone sensed that something significant had just occurred. For Rick, it was just another day of asserting his authority. For Jordan, it was the beginning of a reckoning that would shake the precinct and Rick's life to its core. The rest of the document continues with the unfolding drama, shifting power dynamics, and the eventual triumph of accountability and justice. Would you like me to elaborate further or make any adjustments?